In this video, I'm going to go over some examples of word problems that involve ratios and proportions. Now, I want you to first just watch and listen to a few, and then you can go back and write these down, but I really want you to focus on listening as I work through these first couple problems. Okay. So the first one says that the Crayola Crayon Company can make 2,400 crayons in 4 minutes. How many crayons can they make in 15 minutes? So the first step is to understand the problem. Look to see what information we have and what it is we're trying to find out. So the first piece of information that we have is that the company can make 2,400 crayons in 4 minutes. So this is one specific situation. Now we have this other situation where we have the time is 15 minutes, but we don't know how many crayons. Okay. Now, if you notice in both of these situations, we have these two variables. We have the number of crayons and the number of minutes it takes to make those crayons. So we can use that as our ratio, crayons to minutes. So the first thing I'm going to do is write out that ratio using the words. Now I'm going to actually set up my proportion. So my proportion is two ratios equal to each other. And I just established that my ratio is crayons over minutes. So each ratio on either side of the proportion is going to be crayons over minutes. So now I just have to fill in with numbers and variables. So this first ratio on the left, I'm going to make that for my first situation here. I have 2,400 crayons in 4 minutes. Now my ratio on the right, I'm going to fill in for my second scenario, which is we don't know how many crayons in 15 minutes. Okay, so there's my proportion. Now I'm going to clean this up a little bit. So this can be my third step. 2,400 over 4 equals x over 15. So I just got rid of the labels, turned my question mark into an x. So now I can cross multiply, solve for x. So my one diagonal here, 4 times x, is 4x. My other diagonal, 2,400 times 15, which if I do that in my calculator, it's 36,000. Okay, so clean that up again. So it's 4x equals 36,000. So that's what you do, is you go from a proportion to an equation. That's your goal. Now to solve for x, divide both sides by 4. So x equals 9,000. Okay, and then my final step is to really answer the question. Okay, if it's a word problem, there's a question. It wants to know how many crayons can be made in 15 minutes. So my answer really should be a sentence, or at least something along the lines of, having some sort of sense to it, having some labels. So 9,000 crayons can be made in 15 minutes. Okay, so there's my answer. All right, so let's look at another one. Okay, a typist can type 120 words in 100 seconds. At that rate, how many seconds would it take her to type 258 words? And how many minutes would it take? So again, let's look at, we have two scenarios. We have one scenario where 120 words are typed in 100 seconds. My second scenario is 258 words, and we don't know the time. That's what we're trying to figure out. So I can set up a ratio, words to seconds. Okay, so now if I put my proportion together, my first situation, I have 120 words in 100 seconds. My second situation, we don't know the number of seconds this time, but we know how many words, so that we have the numerator this time, not the denominator, which is fine. Okay. So now let's put that into kind of a cleaner looking proportion using a variable, not a question mark, something that we can now solve. So 120 over 100 equals 258 over x. So now if I cross multiply, so one diagonal here, 120 times x, my other diagonal, 258 times 100. If I multiply those out, multiplying by 100 is basically just adding two zeros, so 25,800. Divide both sides by 120. Let me do that real quick. 215. Okay, so my final answer, we could say 258 words can be typed in 215 seconds. Now there's another part to this question, if you remember. If we go back up here, it says how many minutes? Well, there's 60 seconds in a minute. So we can just take our 215 seconds, divide it by 60, which is 3.58 minutes. Oops. So about 3.5 minutes, or 215 seconds. Okay. Okay, so now our last example here says that measuring miles on the ocean, which are called nautical miles, is different from normal miles on land, which are called statute miles. In fact, 100 nautical miles is equal to 115 statute miles. How many nautical miles is equal to 320 statute miles? Oops, I spelled that wrong. Oops, there should be a T there. I didn't know this about miles, did you? Kind of interesting. Okay, maybe not, who knows. So we have this comparison here of measurement, and if you remember from the road trip activity, the scale on your map compared inches to miles. So that was another example of a scale factor is another way that we call it, this ratio of comparing two measurements. So here we have a comparison of nautical miles to statute miles. Okay, so my ratio, or my proportion now, so putting those two ratios into a proportion, my first ratio, I have this specific example where 100 nautical miles, and I'm just going to abbreviate NM, is equal to 115 statute miles. Okay, so if you remember on the road trip, that was part of your proportion 1 over 300, because that was your scale. Now my second scenario that I'm trying to figure out here is, okay, now how many nautical miles is equal to 320 statute miles? Okay, so my proportion, 100 over 115 equals x over 320. So if I cross multiply 115x, my other diagonal, 100 times 320. If you remember what I just said about multiplying by 100, 320 times 100, add two more zeros, so 32,000. And then divide both sides by 115. So x equals 278.26. Okay, so my final answer would be 278.26 nautical miles is equal to 320 statute miles. So 278.26 miles on the ocean would be equal to about 320 miles on land.